was about a 5% chance of me living.
So it affected your speech?
My speech, my hearing.
Walking?
Walking.
I mean, did you have to sort of start over and relearn?
Yes, everything.
All of this?
Everything.
Really?
My whole life was wiped out.
For decades, Sharon Stone made a career out of looking untouchable. She knew what to reveal, what to keep private, and when silence was the only way to survive Hollywood's rules. But at 68, something changed. Across interviews and public appearances in 2025 and 2026, Sharon began revealing parts of her life she had kept buried for decades. Stories involving betrayal, violence, motherhood, money, and the price she paid for refusing to play by Hollywood's rules. So what finally made her break her silence? And what has she revealed about the life behind one of Hollywood's most carefully guarded images? Join us as we uncover what Sharon Stone finally said. What she was never told. Prior to any of the revelations about assault, illness, custody battles, and financial ruin, there is a single scene that shaped everything that came after it in Sharon Stone's public life. And she has now confirmed that the scene was filmed through a deception that she did not discover until she was sitting in a screening room watching the finished film with an audience. The crossing and uncrossing of the legs in the police interrogation sequence of Basic Instinct in 1992 is one of the most discussed moments in film history. The conversation around it has run continuously since the film's release, whether it was exploitative, empowering, or whether it defined Sharon Stone as an actress or reduced her to an image, whether the industry that built that image around her was serving her career or consuming it. What has been less discussed is how that scene was actually obtained. Sharon has said publicly that she did not know her genitals would be visible on screen during the filming of the interrogation sequence. The version of the story she was given during production was that the camera angle being used would not show anything explicit, and that removing her underwear for the scene was a practical suggestion to prevent the fabric from appearing as a white light reflection under the lighting setup. She was told the reveal would not happen. She later found out that she was fully exposed when she sat in the screening room and watched the film. Her response to director Paul Verhoeven in that screening room, as she has described it, was immediate and furious. She then faced a calculation that the entertainment industry regularly presents to women. The choice between accepting what had been done and preserving a career, or refusing to accept it and finding out what refusal costs. The film was already cut, with the scene already in it, and Basic Instinct was already positioned as a major release. She has said she ultimately concluded the performance was good enough to be worth having it released, but the conditions under which that performance was obtained were not what she consented to. Decades later, in her 2021 memoir, The Beauty of Living Twice, she addressed the scene, explaining that the removal of her underwear for the shot had been presented to her as a technical necessity rather than a creative decision, and that the full implication of what would appear on screen was not communicated to her before filming. The memoir became a bestseller partly because of the clarity with which she described this and the other costs she had paid. But the memoir, as she noted in multiple interviews following its publication, was also constrained. There were things she could not say, names she could not name, agreements she had signed that put a ceiling on what she could disclose. By 2025 and 2026, that ceiling had started coming down. So, what were the things that came to light? The thing that happened in the 1980s. When Sharon Stone first moved to Los Angeles in the 1980s, she was anyone the industry thought it needed to manage. She was called to a meeting at Sony Pictures, a meeting with the head of the studio. She was new enough to Los Angeles that she had one nice outfit, and she wore it. She was excited in the way that young people who have not yet learned what excitement costs can be excited. The executive paced and praised her, her beauty, her intelligence, her hair, her articulateness, her potential. He told her everyone was talking about her. He told her what they were saying. And then he stopped pacing and walked directly in front of her, said, "But first," and exposed himself. She became hysterical, she said, using her own words for her reaction. The executive backed away, and his secretary eventually led her out. She told this story on Kelly Ripa's Let's Talk Off Camera podcast in November 2023, and what she said alongside the story is as revealing as the story itself. She said there was no way she could have told it before. She said that if she had, Sony would never have hired her again. And given the realities of how the industry worked then and the leverage executives held over talent, she was almost certainly right. She also revealed that she specifically did not name names in her memoir because it was a pointless exercise. They know who they are. She was not offering forgiveness or absolution. She was describing a decision she made about the strategic value of disclosure in a world that regularly punishes people who disclose. What the Sony story does, placed alongside the Basic Instinct scene, is establish a pattern that Sharon Stone was navigating from the very beginning of her Hollywood career. A pattern of men in positions of power over her career, taking things from her body and her autonomy that she had not offered, and her having to calculate in real time what each incident cost and what responding to it would cost further. The calculation changed over decades. By 2023, she had decided that telling the Sony story publicly, even without the name attached, was something she was willing to do. The calculation had shifted enough, but the Sony story and the Basic Instinct scene were not the most shocking things she broke her silence about. Waking up on the floor and waiting. 10 years to know what happened. In June 2026, on the podcast The Person Who Believed in Me, hosted by CBS News contributor David Begnaud, Sharon Stone described something that she said she had not previously told publicly in any detail. She began talking about it in the context of her marriage to Phil Bronstein falling apart, and then the story took a direction that stopped the conversation cold. "I don't know how much I can say about this. I was hit from behind," Sharon said. "I didn't really know until 10 years later what had happened to me, because I woke up. I was unconscious on the floor. The two couches were sideways. The coffee table was all over the place. She woke up on the floor, unconscious, in a room that had been physically disrupted in the way rooms are disrupted when violence has occurred in them. She did not immediately know what had happened. The understanding of what that night had actually been came 10 years later, through a medical examination that produced a finding she described in the most specific terms available. She said a doctor discovered evidence of a felony crime during a medical exam. She did not name the perpetrator. When David Begnaud pressed her, she said simply, "I'm not at liberty to say." The 10-year gap between the night she woke up on the floor and the day a medical examination told her what had actually happened is the detail that makes the story most difficult to process. A decade of not knowing. A decade of carrying the memory of waking up in a disturbed room without a complete understanding of what it meant. The revelation arriving not through any form of justice or disclosure, but through the clinical findings of a medical examination performed for different reasons entirely. The fact that she is telling this story at 68 on a podcast without a name attached means that the person who did it has not been identified publicly. The confidentiality she is operating under may be the same mechanism that has kept many of Hollywood's secrets intact. Not silence by choice, but silence by legal constraint. The kind that protects perpetrators behind the same agreements that were supposedly protecting victims. The Hollywood story was one she was still constrained from fully telling. But another chapter of Sharon Stone's life came with a different kind of silence, one imposed not by lawyers, but by her own body: the brain hemorrhage. In September 2001, Sharon Stone was living in San Francisco with her husband, Phil Bronstein, when she developed a headache that she initially dismissed. By the time the severity of what was happening became impossible to ignore. 3 days had passed. She was taken to a San Francisco emergency room. What the doctors found when they examined her was catastrophic. Sharon was rushed to a San Francisco emergency room after suffering a blinding headache. After spending more than a week in the hospital, Sharon's doctors discovered that her brain, facial cavity, and spinal column were internally bleeding, and she was taken into surgery. My brain was pushed forward into my face. I'd lost 18% of my body mass. I came out of the hospital with short and long-term memory loss. My lower left leg was numb. I couldn't hear out of my right ear. The side of my face was falling down, she said. She underwent a 7-hour procedure to stop the bleeding and repair the torn artery. The hemorrhage had lasted 9 days. She was 33 years old when it happened, a woman at the height of her fame and commercial value in Hollywood, starring in films that were earning hundreds of millions of dollars, with a career that seemed structurally incapable of slowing down. The recovery was total in scope and terrifying in its implications. It took me about 7 years, Stone later told People magazine, from trying to keep custody of my son to just functioning to be able to work at all. 7 years. The woman who had been one of the most powerful presences in Hollywood was, for 7 years, primarily engaged in the work of rebuilding the basic capacities of daily life that the hemorrhage had disrupted: memory, speech, hearing, walking, reading. She has said in various interviews that she had to relearn essentially everything, that her brain had changed in ways that required her to start over with fundamental cognitive and physical functions that she had previously taken entirely for granted. The 5% survival chance that doctors cited made the relearning feel like a gift, but a gift that required years of labor to convert into something usable. What Hollywood did with those 7 years was move on. The roles went to other actresses. The position she had occupied at the top of the industry's hierarchy of bankable stars was redistributed. She was not dropped publicly or ceremoniously. Nothing so definitive ever needed to happen. The industry simply continued without her. And when she was well enough to return, the space she had occupied no longer existed in the form she had left it. She described this process with characteristic clarity in an interview about the Women's Brain Health Initiative. I had lost my marriage, lost custody of my child, lost my place in line in the business, lost all my money because I was paying so many different things. I was scraping by. I know what it's like to go through a situation where you are the top of your field, to be absolutely wiped out. From the absolute top to scraping by. Between 2001 and some point in the years following her divorce, the hemorrhage did not just take her health. It took the window in which her career could have continued on the trajectory it had been following, and the industry was not waiting when the window closed. And then the marriage ended in the worst possible way. The surgery he authorized without her consent. Phil Bronstein was a Pulitzer Prize-nominated war correspondent and former editor of the San Francisco Chronicle. He and Sharon Stone married on Valentine's Day, 1998, and adopted a son, Roan, in 2000. The marriage coincided with the brain hemorrhage, and the decisions Phil made during her medical crisis are ones she has now described publicly for the first time, in the podcast interview that has generated more response than anything she has said in years. Sharon Stone said on the Person Who Believed in Me podcast that the divorce happened after Phil made medical decisions for her without her permission when she suffered a brain aneurysm and stroke in September 2001, and after he refused to support her decision to have a double mastectomy after tumors were found in her breasts. The accusation she made about the surgery authorization is one of the most serious in the interview. Sharon told host David Begnaud that her ex-husband signed me up for exploratory brain surgery without my knowledge or consent, and that she had to stop it herself on the gurney. On the gurney, meaning she was already being prepared for a surgical procedure that someone else had authorized on her behalf, and that she had not agreed to, and she had to physically intervene to stop it from happening to her body. She had not spoken this specifically about what happened during her medical crisis in any previous public forum. The memoir acknowledged the dissolution of the marriage without providing this level of detail. Constrained by the confidentiality agreement she had signed, the podcast interview suggested that agreement has expired, or that she has made a different calculation about what it permits. When Phil eventually filed for divorce, which became final in 2004, the custody battle over Rowan became one of the most painful experiences of her life. The judge asked Rowan, who was approximately 8 years old at the time, whether he knew that his mother made sex movies. Sharon Stone has cited this question as evidence of a judicial system that used her career against her motherhood, taking the image that Hollywood had built around her, the image she had not fully consented to in the first place, and weaponizing it in the most personal context imaginable. A judge decided that Rowan should reside with Phil, a decision Sharon described with devastating economy. I had had a brain hemorrhage and was an actress who had made sexy movies. Those were the two facts the system used to take her son. She was sick, and she had been filmed in a way she had not consented to, and the combination of both things was used in a family court to transfer custody of her child to someone else. She was left, in her own description, broken, going to philanthropic events and asking God to help her function publicly while she had lost her child, her health, and everything she had built. A woman who had been one of the most famous and financially successful actresses on the planet, functioning, barely, while the industry moved on, and the courts made decisions, and the lawyers billed, and the money drained away. She eventually regained custody of Rowan. She adopted 2 more sons, Laird and Quinn, as a single mother after the divorce. The family she rebuilt after losing everything is the one she has now. But the path to it went through a period of loss that she has only recently begun to describe in its full dimensions. She is still here. She said at 60 that turning 60 was the greatest achievement of her life, because there was a time she was not sure she would make 50. At 68, having survived everything that came after that statement, she is breaking the silence that she maintained across decades, not because silence was comfortable, but because disclosure was dangerous. The danger has not disappeared. The legal agreements are still constraining what she can fully name, but she has decided that speaking in partial truths is still speaking, that naming the shape of what happened even without naming the perpetrators is still a form of witness, and that at 68, she is not interested in protecting people who never protected her. The woman who made the most provocative entrance in 1990s Hollywood has spent the subsequent decades demonstrating that the provocation was the least interesting thing about her. What is most interesting is that she is still talking, still painting, still raising her sons, still appearing on every red carpet, with the specific self-possession of someone who has been through the fire and came out knowing exactly who she is. Which part of Sharon Stone's story surprised you the most? The revelation about what was done to her on the set of Basic Instinct, the assault she woke up not understanding, or the way the court system used her career against her in the custody battle for her son? And does knowing what she survived change how you see her legacy? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.